Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of The Suited Shootist. And as you would guess from the title, today I'm going to be talking a little bit more about non-permissive environments and not so much tactics as they pertain to them, but considerations. Before I jump in, if you haven't subscribed already, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And once the video is over, if you got some mileage out of it, give it a like. In the same vein, if you are getting a lot of mileage and usage out of the channel, then the Bespoke Solutions Facebook group is a place where we delve into a lot of these topics on a much deeper level. So go ahead, join up over there. We've got a bunch of great discussion that is going on. So let's kind of go ahead and get this started. You hear a lot of talk about non-permissive environments. And for those of you that are unfamiliar, generally when the term is used, it is in regards to carrying a firearm someplace where you're not supposed to, generally speaking by policy. But what I want to break down are my definitions as well as kind of the tiers that have to get factored in. So where I want to start, if you see me looking off camera, I'm just kind of referencing my notes because I really do want to make sure that I touch on all these points. Claude Werner, the tactical professor, has made the delineation between what we call non-permissive environments are really denied areas. A true non-permissive environment is somewhere where you are subject to either search or surveillance pretty much at any given point. The analogy that he uses is being at some kind of diplomatic function and getting bump frisked by like Stasi or KGB. Obviously that doesn't really pertain to a lot of us. Mike Green is somebody, his covert carry class, he touches on this, where while they were technically authorized by the US to be armed, the host nations where they were operating, if they had been discovered, there was the potential to create some kind of international incident. So those are really non-permissive environments. So I'm not going to use that terminology. I'm going to use Claude's definition of the denied area. And those fall into a few different categories. The first one that I'm really not going to talk about is denied areas where it is flat out illegal for you to be carrying a firearm. And realistically, with what I'm talking about here, the discussion is not going to be relegated only to firearms. We're talking about the broader category of weapons, which, yes, is open to interpretation because a weapon has to do more with application than the tool itself, but let's not get bogged down in the minutia. So anywhere where it is illegal to be armed in some capacity, I'm not talking about. I do not advocate breaking the law. You have to determine what your thresholds are. That is up to you. I do not endorse illegal activity. Period, hard stop, that's the end of that one. So moving into the denied areas that we are likely to encounter on a regular basis, they're not all the same. And I think that's the part that really gets lost when people just throw around the term NPE. Because each one of these comes with its own considerations. And the first one being the social denied area. The examples that I will generally use for something like this that are on the horizon are going to be something like a Christmas party, whether it be a friend that's hosting one, or possibly you're going as your spouse's plus one or a friend's plus one to their work function. When it comes to the factors on this one, the folks that you're going to be interacting with, for the most part, you're going to be a new face to them. They don't really know who you are, and that can play to your benefit because that means that they don't have a baseline. You've not already set an expectation for them, and so they don't know how you typically dress and carry yourself. So you're setting the first impression here. And because of that, there's no established pattern for them to recognize a deviation. That generally means that folks can get away with less deliberate concealment and less discreet decisions in these environments than in some of the others that I'm going to talk about. And now, the catch is that this is not going to be, if you get discovered, this is not necessarily going to be the highest level of consequence, but there's still some relatively high stakes here, because if you're that guy that brought a gun to the party, there's going to be some social fallout there. If nothing else, it could just mean that it's an awkward evening. It could be something to the effect of you now basically being rejected by that social circle, and depending on what the nature of that relationship is, it may not be a big deal. If it's a friend or a loved one's professional event, obviously there could be some second, third order consequences there that warrant a higher level of discretion. So just because nobody's getting arrested or going to prison or the hospital doesn't mean that the possible negative outcomes can just be dismissed outright, because there can be fallout from these kind of things that can have lasting impressions. The other part of it is Eric Nelson actually made a video in response to the one that I talk about, my getting made at work, where if somebody thinks or suspects that you may be armed, they may not confront you directly. They might call law enforcement to do the confronting on their behalf. So any of these can result in an unwanted official interaction with law enforcement. I'm trying to keep those as close to zero as I possibly can. So that is the social denied area. And that's kind of in the middle of the spectrum, at least by my standard. On the low end of the spectrum is going to be more of the event-specific denied area. These are the ones that we tend to think about in terms of, again, where there might be policies against attendees being armed, but there's nothing that carries the force of law. The most common ones that you're going to see here are going to be theme parks, sporting events, concerts, stage shows, that kind of thing. Typically, it's some kind of entertainment venue. And people will choose to go armed at various levels because you're talking about a large concentration of people, so there's a risk element there, as there is a lot of places. But the other factor on these is that there's generally active security screening of some measure. Sometimes it is as simple as if you are carrying a bag, they're going to search the bag. Sometimes there's going to be a metal detector of some sort involved, whether that be a wand or a walkthrough. Sometimes those will include pat-downs. And so, especially if you don't know for damn sure what those measures are going to be ahead of time, then you need to make sure that if you choose to ignore and not honor the policy, again, policy not law, that you're doing so in a manner that is not going to either garner additional scrutiny or make your behavior so out of place that it's going to catch people's attention. With these, I put them on the fairly low end of the spectrum consequence-wise, because realistically, since we're talking about policy, not law, okay, you're denied access to the event, and worst case scenario, you're simply barred from the venue permanently. So, the threshold for that one's not really a big deal, unless it's just someplace that you absolutely love to go, or you're at risk of some possible social fallout. That's the kind of stuff that comes into play on this. So those factors when it comes to the event-specific denied areas. The last one, this is obviously the one that carries the highest risk by my estimation and my experience, is going to be the professional denied area. This is somewhere where, again, we're talking strictly policy, but the policy that's written that prohibits weapons is a condition of your employment. Now, the screening process that, for the security screening that you're going to encounter on this, likely for the most part, unless you work in a particularly sensitive location or industry, is going to be relatively low. But that's not where the risk factor really comes into play. The risk comes in here because you are around the same people day in and day out. They see you on a regular basis. Why is this problematic? This is problematic because people are very good at pattern recognition. Without getting too deep into the science of it, there's a lot of that goes on in terms of the proliferation of what you see on social media. And so the whole idea of it is that you got to bear in mind that the template that you're working against is not just you, like it would be in, say, the social denied area, where people are meeting you for the first time, and it's basically a collection of strangers all in one place. So nobody really has a good benchmark. They may know a couple of people at the thing, but they're not going to know everybody. Well, at work, even if everybody doesn't know everybody is still working in the same space, day in, day out. And so you're not just working against the expectations that have been set by yourself, but by all of your peers as well. And so if you are dressing or acting in a manner that deviates from all of your contemporaries, that can sometimes be weird enough. And this is important on a couple of levels, simply from this standpoint. Even if you play things very close to the vest and nobody in your professional environment knows that you have an interest in firearms, which can, depending on the atmosphere, be a prudent choice. If things are weird enough, then it may just cause people to ask why. So, and if you get enough of that, well, why are they doing that? Or what's that? Or that looks weird. That deviation from the norm can draw additional scrutiny. The additional scrutiny can then start making your life more complicated. And the other challenge of it is because you have the same people that are all within this little microcosm, that's where the rumor mill is. And so you have this kind of game of telephone of, well, so-and-so's acting weird. And acting weird can sometimes turn into, even as like jokingly, they're acting like an office shooter. And it goes from that to, well, maybe they actually are armed, to, I think this person has a gun. So, that's the whole idea, is that you want to make sure that you are truly leveraging the gray man concept and managing the expectations of those around you to where you're not deviating from the norms that people expect to see. Because if you do, it can draw enough attention. Again, an anecdote that Claude Warner uses on this from his time working for a very large commercial real estate organization was that he had opted to size up his clothing, which is a very common recommendation for people when they are trying to accommodate concealing a firearm. Well, it was interesting because since those garments were fitting on him larger than the rest of his clothing had previously, he had multiple coworkers inquire as to if he'd lost weight or not. So it's not an immediate tell his clothes are bigger so he's carrying a gun, but it was enough of a difference for people to notice. And if they notice one change or one deviation, then that can snowball to where you're now getting a lot more eyes on you than you want. Because ideally, you want as few as possible. And the fallout for this, again, you've heard my story. I will link it if you want to watch the whole video. Full disclosure, number one, it's long. And number two, it was shot in very waning light, so the production value is pretty lousy. So if that is all that you take away from that video, there, I just saved you 25 minutes. For the rest of you that are interested in the story, go check it out. It's very high consequence. Number one, you're losing your source of income for an indeterminate period of time. And here's why I say indeterminate. Because depending on what you do, depending on your income level, and depending on the job market, it can be challenging to get yourself back to that level. And so if you are prepared to be unemployed or underemployed for an indefinite period of time, and you have the cash reserves to work through that, cool. And the support system that will allow that to maintain, awesome. But yeah, I've seen that movie and I don't recommend it. Secondarily, depending on the industry in which you work, you may have just torpedoed your entire career, because some of these industries are pretty small and people talk. And if you wound up losing your job because you carried a gun at work when you weren't supposed to, you very well may be looking at having to completely reinvent yourself professionally. There are some people for whom that is not a big deal or a daunting proposition. There are other people who have accumulated a very niche skill set and sometimes in a corresponding high level of student debt that don't necessarily have the luxury of an easily replaceable line of work. So I'm not telling you not to carry it at work. I'm not telling you to carry it at work. I'm just saying that when it comes to denied areas, it is a lot more layered of a topic than just, well, it's an NPE, so here's what you do for NPE carry. When it comes to things like the social denied area, I can generally get away with my Enigma and a tucked in shirt. When it comes to something like the event specific denied area, there are people out there that will address that problem specifically with non-magnetic tools. For the professional denied area, my solution at this point is that I carry things that are fairly innocuous. I do not carry firearms in a professional capacity. I do not carry firearms when I am on the clock anymore. For me, that's relegated to pepper spray and a sap, if I can get away with that. So that's basically that. Or, again, depending, that is where low profile guns come into play. I haven't had the privilege to attend it yet, but I am making a point to block off my calendar when the non-permissive environment class that is put on by the trio of Chuck Haggard, Cecil Birch, and Daryl Bulkey is going to be in Oklahoma at the beginning of next year, and I'm going to make the arrangements so that I can attend that, because the one that they did a few months ago was apparently a rousing success, and they talk a lot about considerations like this. Note that I'm not talking about firearm access, I'm not talking about draw times and things like that, simply because that's kind of its own thing. I've done a video on what my findings were regarding my access to a pistol from a tucked-in shirt and a tucked-in shirt with a jacket compared to my normal draw to first shot time. Spoiler alert: none of the times are particularly impressive, but I've seen what considerations have to get factored in with that. And honestly, after the counter robbery class that I took with Lone Star Medics and Daryl of Hardwired Tactical, it's a piece of the equation, but honestly, with circumstances like this, anytime you're talking about denied areas, like whether it be the Christmas party, whether it be the workspace, whether it be the concert venue, there are so many people present that unless you happen to be the very first one targeted, the way I'm doing the math, I get the impression that there's enough of a window for the appropriate decision making and tool access that that I'm not sure how critical the draw to first shot times are in that yet. I'm not going to go out and say that it doesn't matter, because I don't have any data to point to yet. But Obviously, you want to keep your capabilities as at high a level as you realistically can, but I don't want to get into that debate. So this is kind of my assessment when it comes to the idea of denied areas. What do you guys think? If you're willing to share some of your approaches to these various denied areas, go ahead and share them in the comments. If you think I'm completely off base and you will never go anywhere where you're not allowed to carry a firearm or concealed means concealed, cool, rock on, whatever. There's more to the conversation than that, in my opinion, but hey, you do you. Anyways, if you get a lot of mileage out of the channel and you want to support it directly, I've got a link to the Patreon. I appreciate all the support. I've got awesome patrons. And aside from that, I hope everybody has a great week. Stay dangerous and stay sharp.